Welcome back to the Lights Out podcast, bedtime stories for boys and girls for when the lights go out. Good evening, boys and girls. Are you ready for bed? Are you all tucked up and ready for another Lights Out bedtime story? Well, you're in for a special treat tonight. It's not part of the awesome author August, but it's part of the original improvised stories from me, E3D, or Martin Kenneth. And these stories have been bubbling and brewing for the last couple of days. And I thought, who just needs one story a night when you can have 2 or 3? And so these are little bonus ones, and I'm going to keep them short and sweet. And so tonight's story, the short one, is called Eden and the Magic Roller. And now I've got to tell you before I start. In your house, do you have one of those rollers that it looks like a one that you would use to put paint on the wall, but it's sticky and it's for using to get the dust off your dad's jacket or some bits on the floor, something like that, and you have to peel off a piece of paper every time you lose the stickiness? Do you know what I'm talking about? Well, this story is called Eden and the Magic Sticky Roller. Once upon a time, there was a boy called Eden, and he just loved to play with a roller. Even though his mummy and daddy hid it everywhere around the house so he couldn't play with it, he always found it and took it out and started rolling around everywhere. He would roll the carpets, he would roll the floors, under the table, on the table. He would try and roll the fish tank and the refrigerator and even his mummy and daddy's legs. He would go to bed with the roller stuck to his belly, and his mum would have to peel it off. He loved the roller so much that when he started school, he had to keep it in his bag. Otherwise he refused to go, and he kept crying and demanding, "I want my roller." Well, this became part of the family, you see, and so every day when Daddy would come back home from work, he would buy another roller, because Eden was going through them at 1 roller per day. There was paper scrunched up everywhere. They were spending quite a lot of money on these rollers, but anyway, it kept the boy happy, and also Mum was happy because it kept the house clean. Do you believe that? Well, one day, something terrible happened. When Daddy came home from work, he called in at the shop, and on the shelf, where he would usually find a box of rollers, there was a box of pegs instead for the clothes. So he went to the manager and said, "What happened to your rollers?" "Oh, sorry, Daddy, we haven't got any today. There was no delivery this morning. But you know I've got to buy some for my boy, or else he won't go to school in the morning." "I'm sorry, I'm sure they'll be coming tomorrow." "It's okay. It's only Friday. He'll miss only 1 day." And so Daddy went home and had to break the news that today there was no roller for tomorrow. Well, there was tears and tantrums, and you guessed it, no school for Eden that day. So it was a weekend, and Daddy got up very, very early so that he could go to the shop to see if there was a delivery of rollers. But it wasn't there. And so the manager of the shop called down to the head office and found out that there was a shortage of rollers, and the whole of the city did not get any orders of rollers that week. Oh dear, thought Daddy, and he went back up home and he told Mummy, "Don't tell Eden, not yet. Get on the internet and have a look." And so he did, and he searched on Google for rollers, and he found out that the whole country had not had any delivery of rollers that week. Well, Daddy just could not believe it, and he thought about all the days that Eden was going to miss school by not having any rollers. And so he searched and searched and searched again, and he found out there had been a worldwide shortage of rollers. He called his friend across the road, and luckily he had 1 roller left, and so he got it for Eden. And that day he told him, just use one or two of the rolls of the bits of paper, because this is the last one. And as that night, as Eden was sleeping with the roller stuck to his leg, Daddy searched again on the internet, and he searched and he didn't sleep all night, and about 5 o'clock in the morning he found a shop in Bulgaria, in a tiny village in Bulgaria, that had a pack of 6 left, the only 6 rollers in the whole wide world. And so he emailed the man, and he used the Google Translate to ask in Bulgarian if he could buy these 6 rollers. And the man said, yes, but I'm not going to ship them all the way to where you are. You have to fly over here to buy them. Well, this was a tough decision, because it was a long way to Bulgaria, and it was going to be quite expensive. But he had to weigh it up. And the next day, he found himself and Eden and Mummy on a plane to Bulgaria to pick up 6 of the last rollers in the whole wide world. They got to the airport and immediately took a taxi to the closest hotel to the shop where they sold the rollers. That night, Eden couldn't sleep. He only had one piece of paper left on his roller that he carried all the way across the ocean. And so at 6 o'clock in the morning, they all got up and had some breakfast in the buffet and walked across the road to the shop, the tiny shop that sold the last 6 rollers in the whole wide world. They waited for 2 hours, and when Daddy knocked on the door, an old, rickety man with grey hair and dirty glasses unlocked the door and opened the shutters and let them into the creaky, dusty shop. The shelves were lined with dust, and he said to the man, Daddy said, we've come to buy those 6 rollers, you know, the ones that you had, the ones that were left on your shelf that you said that hadn't been sold. Oh, the last ones in the whole wide world. Yes. How much do you want for them? Well, they're just €1 each. But they've been here a while. I don't know why nobody's bought them. In fact, I didn't even know that they were there until the other week when you inquired about them. And so Daddy paid the man €6 and took them back to the hotel. They packed the bags and booked their flight straight back to their house. They were so happy. But on the way back, they had a good talk to Eden, and they said, you've only got 6 rollers left, and these are the last ones in the whole wide world. We've got to make sure that you use them sparingly. So, only 1 sheet of sticky paper per day. And Eden agreed, and from that day, it took them 1 month to use up the first roll of roller, and they were quite happy because they thought, well, maybe in 6 months he might grow out of the dependence of a roller, and he might want to ride a bike or something that normal boys do. After 3 months, 3 rollers had gone, and they were down to the last 3. Daddy tried to persuade him to use only half a piece of paper per day, but that's not possible, is it? How can you use half a roller when all the dust goes on spread evenly across the paper? So, 2 months later, 5 rollers had been used, and they were down to the last 1. Mummy and Daddy started to get worried because he had no signs of wanting to get rid of the roller and ride a bike or play football. So they just waited. And amazingly, after 2 weeks into the 6th month, the roller seemed like it was still new. And after 1 full month, the roller had not lost any single paper or any single stickiness. After 2 months, the roller was still the same. Eden had started to take the paper off, but the paper seemed like it wasn't going down. Paper after paper, and because of this, he started not using 1 per day, but 10 a day, 100 a day, and there was paper all over the house. But the roller was still looking brand new and sticky. This seems like a bit of a funny roller, thought Daddy. And what are we going to do with all this paper? Now that time, Eden started to be drawing on the walls like kids do, and Daddy thought, well, what I can do is I'll take this paper from the roller and I'll put it all over the wall like wallpaper. And he went to the toy room and he actually did that. He took all the paper from the sticky roller and he put it on Eden's toy room wall. Well, you would never believe what happened next. And the next day, Eden went into the room and he drew a mouse on the wall, and as soon as he closed the line with his pencil, a mouse popped out of the wall and started running across the floor. Well, his mummy doesn't like mice, and she almost had a heart attack and screamed and jumped on the kitchen table, knocking over the milk, which of course the mouse went straight to and started to drink before Daddy caught it and threw it outside. That was a funny looking mouse. I'd never seen a mouse with one leg and 3 eyes before, and a scribble that looked like a name. We've got to call the people to come and clean the house. But the next day, Eden drew a snake, and as soon as he closed the line with his pencil, a purple snake popped out of the wall and slithered across the floor. Well, this time Mum did actually faint, and she fainted, and her face plopped into the cereal bowl and splashed milk all over the floor. And the snake went to lick it up, but Daddy caught it and threw it out the window, and it flew down miles and miles down to the ground and squashed in a purple bubbly mess. What was that? Where did that come from? And so Dad, being worried about Eden, ran into the toy room only to find the picture of a mouse and a snake on the wall. And Eden was drawing the picture of a dinosaur, and as he was about to close the gap with his pencil, Daddy dived and said, "No, don't do it." But it was too late. A little baby dinosaur jumped out of the wall, and started prancing around, biting toys, and he even bit Daddy's bum. Well, Daddy didn't like that, so he put some tape around the dinosaur's mouth and flushed it down the toilet. Anyway, to cut a long story short, Daddy came back and he discovered that the wall and the paper was magic. So, what would you do if your wall was magic like that, and that anything you drew came to life and jumped out? That's right. Daddy drew diamonds and gold and treasure and money and all kinds of things, and they all popped out of the wall. They filled their toy room full of treasure and money, and they were just about to live happily ever after when there was a knock at the door. Daddy opened it, and there, standing in front of the door, was the old man with the grey hair and the dirty glasses from Bulgaria. "I see you've discovered the magic of that roller, and I see you've become very rich. You only paid me €1 for that. Now, I think you should give me half of the gold, and then I'll take the roller away, because you've got enough of what you deserve." Daddy, being a fair man, said okay, and so he gave the man half of the gold and diamonds and the rings and the money and the roller, and he went home. And he closed the door, and from that day on, Eden didn't really want to play with rollers, and also Daddy and Mummy didn't have to work all the time, and they stayed home and lived happily ever after. The end.